everyone. Welcome to our monthly Plus16 webinar series. Thank you for taking the time to join us. We know that you are busy, so our goal, as always, is to be focused and to pack meaningful data into an efficient 30-minute window. Please feel free to drop any questions into the chat as we go through the presentation, and we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. We will be recording this session and sending you a link afterwards. Additionally, we'll post a transcript of the webinar on our blog. So let's get started. My name's Kathy Dew. I'm the CEO and Information Architect for 2Plus2 Partners. I've also got Sally Dew, our Creative Director, here with me. Tony Barata, our CTO, is available if we get any technical questions near the end. Today we're talking about the implementation of your SharePoint intranet navigation. With the newer versions of Microsoft's collaboration platform, there's more than one way to set up navigation. But we also want to talk about the design of that navigation. Determining the best scheme for your intranet is a process, and one that is informed by and can benefit from considering the following points. 1, what does the SharePoint platform have to offer? You need to understand what it is and how to use it. Number 2, standards and best practices for organizing intranets. Number 3, perhaps the most important, are the characteristics of your organization. The size, number of employees, the complexity of your organization in terms of departments, services, and products. Your current SharePoint implementation. Most of our projects include the migration and often an upgrade of an existing SharePoint instance. Finally, the culture of your company. All of these aspects of the project will help guide the information architecture and technical implementation of your intranet. So what does SharePoint offer? As hinted at in the title of this webcast, there are two primary ways to set up your navigation in SharePoint. Structured, which follows the site collection hierarchy, and 2, managed, which is more of a roll-your-own approach based on user-defined metadata. Actually, there's a third option called search-driven navigation, which has some advantages, but it requires customizing the master page of SharePoint, which is typically a strict no-no, as it compromises ongoing support and rollout of new features. At this point, we really can't recommend it. Let's start with structured navigation. This is the out-of-the-box option for navigation used by default. It is the most straightforward and is the appropriate solution in lots of circumstances. If you don't have a complex structure of multiple subsites or many levels of subsites, structural navigation even performs well. There are a number of advantages to this approach. First, it's security trim, meaning that SharePoint looks at the individual permissions of the logged-in user and then removes anything that employee doesn't have access to from the menu. Number 2, it's automatically updated when new sites are added. Nothing needs to be done when you add new sites or subsites to your site collection. These will automatically be included in the navigation with the same security trimming. Next, under the covers, it doesn't require any customization of the master page, which, as we said before, is a strict no-no. Finally, non-technical users can make minor changes to the navigation if needed. The next out-of-the-box solution is managed metadata navigation. Before we get there, let's recap metadata and some of the terminology around this concept. In the simplest terms, metadata is data about data or information about information. It's data that can be associated with SharePoint assets, like documents and folders, to catalog it and make it easier to find. A good example and often used metadata term for intranets is department. If you're working on a project for human resources, you might include the metadata tag of HR to make it easy for anyone in the HR department to find it. In addition to tagging by department, you can use metadata to classify files based on document type, client, subject, project, or anything that is meaningful to the group accessing the information. Metadata terms and values are managed in the term store by defining groups and term sets. Term sets are the basic building block. When you create a term set, you're creating a collection of related metadata terms. You can create term sets on both local, which are specific to the site, and global levels, which would be across sites. Local term sets are typically used on a single site and would only apply to one department or team. Global term sets are more universal metadata tags and are typically used throughout your SharePoint ecosystem. If some of the terms are unfamiliar, don't worry. This is SharePoint speak for basic metadata concepts. Let's clarify a few terms. Taxonomy is a hierarchical classification of words, labels, or terms that are organized into groups based on similarities. A taxonomy may be defined and centrally managed by one or more individuals. A folksonomy is a less formal classification where users collaboratively apply words, labels, or terms to content on a site. A folksonomy-based approach to metadata can be useful because it taps the knowledge and expertise of site users and content creators, and it allows content classification to evolve with the user's changing business needs and interests. Within SharePoint taxonomy, a term set is a group of related terms. Depending on where a term set is created, its scope can be local or global. Term sets can be configured to be closed, which means that users cannot add new terms when they're entering a value for a column that is mapped to a term set, or they can be configured to be open, which means that users can add new terms to the term set. It's important to note that we highly recommend that organizations have tightly managed sets of terms for global navigation and other terms that will be used across the intranet. For example, departments, service definitions, product groupings, and other concepts that will likely be used throughout your intranet. You don't want each area to have its own definition of what a department is. A term is an individual item within a term set. It is a specific word or phrase that can be associated with an item in a SharePoint site. A term has a unique ID and it can have many different text labels or synonyms. If you're working on a multilingual site, it can also have labels in different languages. Groups define security boundaries. A group is a set of terms that all share common security requirements. Only users who are designated as contributors to a specific group can manage those term sets belonging to that group or create new term sets within it. Organizations should create unique groups for term sets that have unique access or security needs. So what does this have to do with navigation? Well, it turns out you use the same term store structure to define the terms that will become your navigation. Let's take a closer look. Managed metadata navigation is another out-of-the-box method of setting up your navigation for your intranet. It can be used to recreate the same sort of functionality as structural navigation, but the actual labels and links are based on specific decisions, including the order of the menus. For a little background, in SharePoint Server 2010, by default, you could only base navigation on the structure of the site. To create a site navigation based on any data structure that in many cases would greatly improve the user experience, you had to create a custom navigation that wasn't easy to maintain and it couldn't be centralized. Managed navigation lets you define and maintain your site navigation by using term sets. With managed metadata navigation, you can now break free from the physical structure of your content so that it no longer defines your navigation. Instead, navigation is based on how you tag your content with terms from a term set. For example, in previous versions of SharePoint, if you wanted to add a new page under About Our Company, you had to add that page physically under the About Our Company branch. With managed navigation, you can add a page to the branch that makes the most sense to you and then later add it to the navigation. One of the biggest advantages of using managed metadata is that it executes more efficiently than structured navigation, which remember is basically building the site navigation with each screen flip. To support security trimming, SharePoint has to look at the entire structure to build a security trimmed menu based on the user's access rights. A big disadvantage of managed metadata navigation is that there is no way to security trim the results. So if an employee doesn't have access to a given site, the link will show anyway. When the link is clicked, an access error message is presented. But remember, you have complete control of the links, the labels, and the corresponding action. Links can include sites, pages, documents, pretty much anything. And you have the complete control over the order of the items. This is a big benefit, especially for the top level or two of navigation in an intranet ecosystem. So let's recap the pros and cons of each approach. Structured navigation. Sites are automatically added. When you add a new subsite to your site collection, it is automatically added to the navigation. It's easy to maintain because it happens automatically. Also, pages are automatically added. The resulting navigation is also security trim for the specific employee. If a user doesn't have access to the link, it won't appear in the navigation. Those are all the plus sides of structured. So now let's look at some of the plus sides of managed metadata navigation. By using this form of navigation, you can design site navigation around important business concepts. It makes sense to your organization and employees. You also might experience significantly faster page loads because the navigation is accessed via a specific location and doesn't have to read the entire structure to build the nav. Pages are automatically added. The navigation term set is the backbone of your managed navigation feature. By default, as you create new pages in your publishing site, new terms are automatically added to the navigation term set, which shows up in the menu. It's easy to maintain with more options to target search. Documents tagged with a navigation term also show up in search results along with the home page of a term. This results in a better search experience. Managed navigation also creates friendly URLs. For those of you familiar with SharePoint, you're going to remember this. In previous versions of SharePoint, the URL to a page contained a reference to the page libraries and any folders within that library. So you would have www.organization.com/pages/HR/benefits and finally /summarybenefits.aspx. With managed navigation, URLs are based on the terms in the term set that drives your site navigation. So that same link would just be www.organization.com/HR/benefits. This is huge for the overall usability of your site and search engine results. Now let's talk about the cons. Structured navigation. As we discussed a couple of times, it can result in slower speeds when complex navigation structure is in use. It needs to make calls to the SQL Server database to get to a subsite that is buried deep in the site collection. URLs can be hard to read and therefore hard to memorize. Home pages belonging to structured navigation links do not automatically appear in the search when you type a search term. Finally, you can't tag a structured navigation link to a document that may relate to, which results in a less robust search. Managed metadata navigation also has some cons. The biggest we've talked about a few times is it's not security trimmed. This can be not a great experience because you see the link, you click on it, and you get an error message. We'll talk about how to mitigate that in a little bit. Second, new sites in the site collection are not automatically added to the navigation. Next, while it's true that you cannot use managed metadata term sets across site collections, which would definitely be a negative, there are ways to mitigate the impact of this. The short and somewhat oversimplified description of the solution is that you define the navigation once, and then subsequent site collections have a managed navigation that is pinned to the original master global navigation term set. As changes are made to the global, these will get pushed out to all the other site collections. Like I said, that's pretty simplified. We'd be happy to talk about it in a session after this if you're interested in talking more about this option. So this is a good summary of considerations for the two types of navigation. Structured works well with shallow, less complex site collections. Managed metadata navigation is used when you want to diverge from the physical site structure. As long as the menu items are basically static, then the maintenance effort is not a big deal. In terms of the overall intranet navigation, the type of navigation is also impacted by how many site collections versus sites you have. Further, if your organization needs multiple site collections, which it probably will, you'll want some sort of global navigation. Then you'll likely need a navigation scheme that spans those multiple site collections. Before we dig into when to create a site versus a site collection, let's look at the design of your intranet navigation from a content and feature point of view. Let's look at what makes an intranet information architecture and navigation design good. In practice, intranets are designed to solve for three types of internal business communication needs. 1, deliver one-way, top-down corporate news and HR information. Number 2, offer a library of best practices and process documentation. Number 3, provide a space for employee-to-employee sharing and real-time communication and collaboration. But your intranet can be more. It can be a way for employees to connect and learn about other aspects of the organization. It can be a way to inspire and engage. In terms of getting to the best navigation for your organization, it is critical to approach the information architecture with an employee-first mindset, not management, not an org chart, and definitely not IT. So for a few basic tenets, keep it simple, clear, and concise. Don't be obscure or cryptic or cute with your labels. Next, put search front and center. Make it really good. Luckily, SharePoint continues to improve and expand its search feature. Next, feature news and announcements to keep your content fresh. You can also make it personal by featuring employees. Consider a way to let employees recognize each other with kudos and shout-outs. You can also add feeds with the latest search terms or frequently used documents. What this does is basically let employees benefit from site usage by other employees. Next, provide an employee directory. This is a great way to have an extremely useful resource on the site and keep individual employee records current. But of course, there's more. This is all in the notion of pushing information. You should also consider automating a business process. Be sure to support employees in their everyday work efforts. You can provide an employee onboarding checklist, provide a vacation calendar and an approval process, deliver timesheets and notifications to HR and payroll, have an anonymous suggestion box, provide training material, presentations, and testing. This is a great way to make the intranet not only a place for push content, news, and announcements, but to make it a key part of an employee's workday. I've been following the UI experts at Norman Nielsen Group since they started in 1998. If you don't know them, I encourage you to check them out at nngroup.com. In an article just last week titled "The Top Enduring Intranet Design Mistakes, 7 Deadly Sins," Kara Pernice, Senior VP at NNG, discussed the fact that while intranet tools and programs come and go, bad UIs linger for years. They negatively impact employee productivity and morale and ultimately increase organizational costs. Here's a quick recap of her points. Don't let your intranet design get dragged into any of these common design evils. Number 1, poor search results. SharePoint now supports faceted search, powerful filters, and a beautiful document preview triggered with a hover. Number 2, content in silos. The number 1 employee complaint with intranets is they can't find what they're looking for. Number 3, poor visual layout. Design still matters with a focus on delivering a consistent user interface. 4, illegible text. This speaks to content. Quality content matters. Don't cheap out. Next, announcements and promotions that look like external ads. We are all trained to ignore anything that looks like an ad, even on an intranet. Don't do it. Number 6, global navigation that disappears. This is, of course, on point with what we've been talking about today. It's really important to have consistent navigation across your intranet. And then last, portal pages that only promise content. You've heard the phrase, content is king. It's true on your intranet too. SharePoint Metadata is a powerful tool to address many of these issues in particular. Earlier this year, NNG also had some specific comments related to SharePoint in an article titled Design a Brilliant SharePoint Intranet. Here are a few of the highlights. Microsoft SharePoint is a platform for creating intranets. It includes many helpful features such as search, a content management system, news, employee directory, personalization, team collaboration spaces, blogs, wikis, and news. The second point was its strong market adoption. The Radicati Group's 2015 Microsoft SharePoint Market Analysis 2015 to 2019 report asserts that Microsoft SharePoint continues to see strong market adoption across all verticals, and it's projected to grow at an annual average growth rate of 20% over the next 4 years. In summary, SharePoint requires an in-depth UX design and development. Forge strong relationships with SharePoint UX designers and developers for strong intranets, and take advice from winning teams who have made SharePoint an effective enterprise tool. So now let's get back to implementation. As you implement and maintain your intranet, you'll be adding new sites on a fairly routine basis. Should these be sites or site collections? This will have a very direct impact on your navigation decisions. Having a set of guidelines is important, not just in the initial design, but should be part of the ongoing management of your intranet ecosystem. So let's recap sites and site collections. A SharePoint site basically is a website. SharePoint allows you to create websites of specific types, like a personal site, a team site, a social media site, a blog or a wiki site, etc. Each site contains SharePoint web parts, like a document library, a calendar, task lists, and more. SharePoint sites can have one or more pages to display content to the user. And sites can have subsites, which can have subsites, which can have subsites. A SharePoint site collection is basically a collection of SharePoint sites that share common features like content types, which are based on metadata, templates, site columns, permissions, web parts, etc. Each site collection contains a single top-level site and subsites below it. So when do you create a site in SharePoint? When you want to leverage the same metadata security or navigation as the existing sites in that collection, then it's okay to create a new site. If you're a small organization and you want to minimize administration, just keep adding sites to the one site collection. If you want to leverage the site template, including the branding automatically, another good reason to just create a site. When do you need to create a site collection? One big one is when there's an administrative boundary. If there's a new set of permissions for those users, you're going to want to break that into a new site collection. Another reason is to house all the sites and content for a business unit. Again, they're going to share a number of the permissions, so now you have a small ecosystem for that department. Another time is when a single site collection gets too large to manage and it needs to be split into smaller ones. You may want to organize sites for a common purpose, such as an enterprise search center or to host my sites. We're actually setting up one for a client that will house all of the individual team sites for a group. External sharing should also be done in a separate site collection so that you can leverage special security. Scale and scope are key reasons to create new site collections. The more recent recommendations from Microsoft are related to security and permissions. If you have a completely different security group, you should create a new site collection. This sets up a need for what some folks refer to as global navigation, or navigation that spans site collections. Managed metadata navigation is going to help us here. So to answer the question of which navigation method to use, we recommend that both is probably the right answer. At the end of the day, unless your organization is small, you're going to need multiple site collections, and you will need to support these three flavors of navigation. Global navigation exists across the top of all site collections in your SharePoint ecosystem. It is the same across all these site collections. I would recommend that you limit this to a max of 6 items. Less is more. Local global navigation is typically what you think of as the navigation for a division or a business unit. There may be one or more site collections for that logical branch of the intranet. Local navigation is for the specific site. It shows important lists and pages and features of that site. The purpose is focused and detailed. Team sites and project sites fall into this category. So our recommendation, global, the top nav, we recommend using managed metadata navigation. To deliver an integrated, fully functional navigation, you'll want the same global navigation across all site collections. This has some distinct advantages. A better user experience by providing that consistent navigation across the entire ecosystem. Since everything is exposed via the global navigation, there will be less duplication of content. That's another thing we see. Because people can't find the news, some sites we've seen, they repeat things in multiple places. This can be avoided. It's also one less structure for admins to manage. The next one, global, or top menu navigation within a particular area, we recommend again using managed metadata navigation. For larger organizations, it's likely that there'll be another level of this managed navigation required. You'll need to support cross-site collections within an area, a business unit or department, or the top-level section of the intranet. Structured navigation within a site collection may still be really overwhelming, and you'll want to use managed navigation instead. One of the things we've seen is that subsites can grow really large. It's really important that you limit your drop-down to 10. Even 10 is big, but it's manageable. So finally, for local navigation, which is typically seen in the left in a SharePoint system, we recommend using structured navigation. Once you're in a specific site, the structured navigation is a good scheme. As the specific site grows, the navigation is automatically created. So this concludes the main part of our webinar. We currently have 3 different flavors of large-scale SharePoint implementations going on at 2Plus2. One client is using SharePoint Online Office exclusively for team sites. The main global portal is actually implemented on the Kentico platform, which is an excellent CMS. Another client is using SharePoint Online Office 365 for their entire intranet. Then finally, we have a client that's using SharePoint 26 on-premise for the entire intranet. Global, public, portal, and team sites. So we'd love to talk to you about your project. What time is it? Thank you. Any questions? Okay, look, here's the first question. Is structured navigation supported by the new SharePoint Modern UI? Great question. For those of you who don't know what the SharePoint Modern UI is, in SharePoint Online, they are migrating list by list, feature by feature, to what they're calling their new Modern UI. One big advantage of it is 100% responsive. So this is SharePoint's big play for moving to mobile across the board with SharePoint. So to answer the question, in the current phase of its rollout, Modern UI does not support structured navigation. Microsoft states that that support is in the roadmap, and companies with access to the beta version of the Modern UI have reported it now being available for testing. So we suspect that rollout to first release participants first. We are actually a first release participant with Microsoft. We have not seen it yet, but we hope to before the year end. There's actually quite a few things that have been promised before year end this year. Okay, here's another question. You mentioned pinning for sharing structured navigation across site collections. How does that work? Pinning structured navigation includes some additional overhead for setup and maintenance. It's something that's best covered as part of an evaluation of your SharePoint site and build out. The nuts and bolts of navigation pinning is a great topic for a blog post, so look for that shortly. I think we'll probably have one of those by next week. So I'm going to pause for a second to see if there are any more questions. And I don't see any, so we hope you'll join us next year. Yes, our next webinar is going to be next year. The first Tuesday is actually the 3rd of January, with the 2nd being a holiday. So we're actually going to push the webinar out 1 week. So the next webinar for Plus16 series will be January 10th at 10 a.m. Pacific time and 1 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you very much.